Hey and welcome to the channel for an exciting day indeed. Today, as a result of the poll that I had from my last video, we're going to build a Pentium Pro. So I've been collecting parts for a while. I've got everything I need now. So I bought the motherboard on eBay. The last thing I got was the processor and the heatsink, all bought separately from different places, waiting for the prices to be right because these things can get costly. The people who sold me the motherboard even sent me the printout from the retro web, so I don't even have to look up the jumper settings. I think the motherboard's actually made by Intel. I couldn't find any other markings, so it's an Intel VS440FX. So this is a chipset for this massive socket 8 socket we've got here. It was also a chipset, I believe, for the Pentium 2, so they've got similarities. The big cartridge that you got for the Pentium 2 was because they had the level 2 cache on the processor but not on the silicon, and it's the same here, which is why part of the reason why these sockets are so huge and the processors to go in them are so huge as well. So I haven't actually tested this board yet. The first thing we need to do is to put it together on a bench, and before put it in a box and get too far down the road, and make sure it actually works. I did get mildly confused with this. So the processor has a little notch out of the corner like you get on a lot of processors, but there's no marking for it on the actual socket. But eventually it clicked. If you can see the pattern of the pins, the pinholes on the socket, they're very distinct. You can only put it in one way because they've got these kind of rows, horizontal rows at the bottom. So eventually I figured it out and managed to get the processor into the socket. I didn't realize initially, but these processors absolutely require cooling, and when I first had a look I was shocked at how expensive these coolers are, at least in Europe. Eventually I did manage to get one from the States, and I put in an offer and they got accepted. So I actually got this shipped across the Atlantic considerably cheaper than a lot of people trying to fob them off in Europe, which is a bit shocking. Like other Pentiums, the board just takes EDO RAM. It accepts up to 256 megs, so quite a bit. I'm not quite sure what sizes I've got here, but we'll see how it goes. Memory's in, CPU's in, we're all set to go. So we can see we've got 4 PCI and 4 ISA slots there. There was a version of this motherboard that had onboard sound, so this one doesn't. You can see the sort of headers there, but we'll probably put a sound card and a graphics card in and see how it goes. So we've got this. This is a 4MB S3 Verge DX, which should do for this. I don't think we're going to be doing much gaming on this. I forgot to say there's 4 or 3 versions of this CPU, I think. So this is the 200 megahertz version of the Pentium Pro. It's got 256 kilobytes of level 2 cache, but I think there was a version with 512 and even a version with 1 meg. Okay, we're all set. I shouldn't really hold polls for what you're going to make in your next video because I don't know if this works, and if it doesn't work it's going to be a very short video. Yeah, look at that. So all up and running. That's all I really need to know at this point, so it's worth continuing and making the build. So we've got our post details, American Megatrends for the BIOS, VS440FX, and yeah, we've got 32 megs of RAM, so we'll see how far we get with that. Floppy A drive, probably got the cable on the wrong way around. And if we go into the BIOS, I just remembered at this point that I'd totally forgotten to check the jumpers on the motherboard, but when I went into the BIOS and had a little look, there wasn't a whole lot going on in here. The time was set correctly. You can see it has picked up the correct processor speed, so the jumpers must have just coincidentally been set for 200 megahertz, the 256k of level 2 cache there. Yeah, so the people who sold this even put a new battery in and set the time, so that's pretty cool. Not much to do in the BIOS. So I was planning on putting Windows 2000 on this because it does need a 32-bit operating system, and then I remembered I bought this years ago, meaning to get into a bit of retro Linux, and totally forgot about it. This would be perfect. It's a slightly later release, so it's not period correct, but it should be fine. So we'll install this Linux, SUSE Linux 7.0. Will be a very cool OS to put on this. SUSE version 7.0 I think came out in the year 2000, so it's not really that unperiod correct because the Pentium Pro ceased to be manufactured in 2000, so it's kind of more or less current, but the minimum spec processor for this is 486, so it should be fine. And yeah, we need a case, and I just happen to have this rather funky heavy-duty server case kicking around that I got from an office clearance a while back, so this will be a nice case for this build. So having tested it out, I now feel confident that I can open this up and start putting the hardware together. So just need to check that the posts are lined up with this board. I think I need to find another couple of brass ones. Yes, this has a Q-Tech gold power supply. Somebody will comment, they always do. They'll say, take that out of your machine or it'll burn your house down. This may well be true, but it'll do for now. So I'll get the front panel connectors onto the motherboard before I put it in the case. It's always put the board in first and then end up squeezing my hands in and trying to see what goes where. So for once, doing it in the right order. So once the headers were in place, I could go ahead and drop it in, and I haven't really thought about drives for this. I guess I'm going to want a CD drive because the SUSE Linux install is all on either CD or DVD, but I think I'll go with the CD drive just to be a bit more period correct. So I'm quite excited about having a retro Linux box. I thought about it a while back. I bought that popped up cheap on eBay, and I won the auction and then stuck it in a cupboard somewhere and forgot about it. So I'm quite liking the idea of it now, though I'm a bit sort of worried because I remember the only time I installed Linux back in this time period was, I think it was a version of Red Hat came free on a computer magazine cover, and because it was free it was an older version and it didn't have a graphical installer or anything like that. And I remember it completely confusing me being a Windows user by that time. This version we're going to be using here does claim to have a graphical installer, so hopefully it'll be a bit smoother. Motherboard's in, so a remarkably nice, clean and spacious build so far. Like, all the cables are kind of tucked away, and yeah, it's pretty uncluttered, which is nice. Looking at the system requirements on the SUSE box, it says it wants 16 megs minimum, 32 recommended, so I'm going to stick another couple of sticks in here. I'm not quite sure what size they are, but I figure any little extra should help. We'll put in the Verge GX for now. On the bottom of the SUSE box, it does say it supports 3DFX Voodoo cards, so there's scope to put a Voodoo 1 in here as well at some point, which might be fun. Sound cards, it said it supports most creative cards at the bottom, but I'm going to try this. I didn't have any sort of sound blasters free to hand, but this is an Asus card, but it's based around the Vibra C, so hopefully this will work out the box as well and give us some sound. Sound card goes in, that's the last bit, and we just need to get some drives in and then we can get installing the software. It's a bit of a shame the I/O panel wasn't included with this motherboard, so I'll get one of those ones that you can shape yourself, but for now we'll just do without. And just hook up all of the drives externally just to make sure they all work, and don't do my usual trick of screwing everything in and then finding out they don't work and having to take it all apart again. All the drives seem to be working, so I'm booting with the Windows 98 boot disk just to delete any existing partitions, and then when the Linux installer runs it can do its own thing. Drives are in. Last thing, one of the drive bay covers was missing, so I haven't got an exact one, but this one just sits a little bit behind the other one, but I can live with that. There was a case fan already on this case, but no headers on the motherboard, so just hook it up to the PSU with the Molex. And there we have it. The build is complete. Ready for some Linux goodness, so let's get some software installed. And I have to say, it's a sweet looking machine. This one's going to stay built. Quite often I build machines and then take them apart again and use the parts for other things. But I'm going to keep this one. This is going to be my go-to Linux machine and will probably feature again in a few projects in the future. So, on to the software. And this I've had for a few years, and I've been meaning to do like a couple of things, messing about with some retro Linux, maybe doing some coding on it and other things that Linux is good for, some networking and stuff like that. I've never really gotten into Linux. I've had it on machines for various reasons a few times over the years, but I've never really just persevered with it and kept using it So hopefully this will be the machine that gets me more into that. And it's a really nice set of software. Got this little leaf book opening thing on the front that gives you the basic features. And then if we get the box open and take a look inside, there's a whole load of goodies in here. The box weighs a ton. So you can imagine there's going to be a few manuals in here which are going to be useful. So we've got, some big books in there, chunky books. So everything you could ever want to know about the system. It's good to have this stuff on hand. I prefer reading off paper rather than looking things up. So it's nice to have something I can flick through while I'm using this machine if I ever run across any problems and need some advice. So we can see a complete range of install media. So this one's a DVD. So everything that you've got on this entire system is on a single DVD. Or if you're a masochist like I'm going to be, you load it up off this set of CDs, 7 I believe. There's also a couple of boot discs in the box which I didn't get out, which I guess are for if you don't have a system capable of running the graphical installer, then you can use the boot discs to run the old text-based installer, which is quite fiddly to use if I remember correctly. We've got this rather funky quick start guide with the Seuss chameleon mascot on the front, which is quite nice. It's got everything you need to get up and running, system specs, preparation for your machine, like setting your CD drive to be bootable, first boot device in the BIOS. Have a lot of fun, and yes, we're going to have a lot of fun. So yeah, it's nice to have this quick user guide, so even a sort of Linux moron like me should be able to make it through to a decent clean install. The box contains everything, absolutely everything, including promotional material, which is really nice. So yeah, Mailbox Intranet, the UK's leading Linux ISP. Didn't know there was a dedicated ISP that was specifically for Linux. I'm not quite sure how that worked. We've got a merch. You can order some merch here, t-shirts, cuddly tuxers, cuddly Seuss chameleons. I would love to get a Seuss chameleon to sit on the desk here. I doubt I'll ever find one. If I did, it would probably be on eBay selling for about £100. And we've got, this is an application guide, so there's a whole hefty mass of applications come out the box of this. Games, coding stuff, everything you think of. And then this is the master handbook, everything you need to get into the nitty-gritty, into the bowels of your Seuss Linux install. So armed with the media and all of this information, it's time to get installing. Hopefully this will go smoothly. I remember trying to install Red Hat and things back in the past, back in the day, in the sort of late 90s, and it wasn't much fun from what I remember. So once I got installing, I immediately hit an issue which wasn't great. So the graphical installer YAST2 popped up. YAST stands for yet another system tool, and it popped up and it got that far, uncompressing Linux, and it went no further. So straight away, while this has a graphical installer, it isn't really giving you much feedback here. The thing just didn't proceed, and that was it. I tried about 10 times and just got to this point. So I scratched my head for quite a bit around this, and it took a good long time before I finally thought I better go and just check the manual again. So the memory requirement for Seuss 7.0, the minimum memory requirement is 16 megs of RAM. The recommended memory requirement is 32 megs of RAM. At the minute, this system has 40 megabytes of RAM, so I thought I had a little bit of leeway there. But no, if you read a little bit further down the manual, the YAST2 graphical installer, which is what we're trying to run here, requires 64 megs of RAM. So the YAST2 installer has its own memory requirement that's separate from just running the system, which is a new one on me. I guess I could have probably got those boot discs out and run the graphical installer, though that would probably been a lot more painful. So yeah, to run the graphical installer, I added two 32 meg sticks, so now I've got 96 megs of RAM. And yeah, it was just a case of RTFM, read the effing manual. So with 96 megs of RAM installed, it's time to run it again, and suddenly, boom, off we go, installing. And then we're into the YAST2 graphical user interface for the installer. which is very nice. So just to whiz through this, it was all pretty straightforward. It's just a case of putting in your language, putting in your country, and then you decide what it is you want to install, how much of the packages that are on these disks you want. You can install about everything. Don't know how much hard drive space that'll take, so we'll just go default with Office. Here you've got your Lilo installation, or Lilo, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that. So this is your bootloader. If you've got a partition with Windows or DOS, you can set up a boot disk here to let you choose what you want to boot into. We don't care about that because the entire hard drive is going to be dedicated to this Linux install. Next up is just setting up credentials. User credentials first, username, passwords and the like, and then on the following page do the same for the root user for your admin privileges. And then you can do various things like create recovery disks and stuff like that, which I don't really give a damn about. That's the way we roll. Next we fire up and off we go, loading up the packages, preparing your hard disk first, and then in a second we should start to see some install action. And off we go. So we can see that what we chose to install is 341 separate packages. It's going to take a while, so I went off, had a cup of coffee, and I remembered that I had a Tux case badge somewhere, so I went and dug that out. So yep, this looks pretty cool on the case, and I've got a Pentium Pro badge, so I can add a bit more bling to this, coming shortly from Geekenspiel. There was a fair amount of CD swapping going on while all of these things installed. I did kind of regret not putting a DVD drive in there when I saw it had a DVD and everything was on a single disc, but there you go. It did take a while, but got there in the end. Arms tired from moving CDs around, but all of those packages are now installed on the machine. So the next step was a bit of a disaster. So it comes up asking you what resolution you would like to set your system to, and it gives you an option to test it. So I made a really stupid error here. I clicked on 32-bit, and of course I'm using an S3 Verge GX, which isn't capable of doing 32-bit. Click continue to test it, and bang, black screen of death. And that was as far as it got. So despite the fact that this is a nicer way of installing Linux using a graphical installer, it did not give me a way of getting out of this. It should have come back at some point and said that resolution is not supported, please try again, but it didn't. It just stayed black. So yeah, I had to reinstall everything again. When I say I had to, I'm sure that some Linux guru is going to pop up with a comment and say, no, all you have to do is this, this and that. But by this time I was pretty tired because I've been at it for quite a while and filming it all as well. So yeah, I just reinstalled it. So fast forward a little while in time and another install, and deja vu, we're back where we started. I'm going to play it cautious this time. I could have gone to 24-bit color, but I'm going to stick with 16-bit. 1024 by 768. Then the moment of truth, click test and hope it doesn't go black and stay black. So it did go black, then it flickered, and then way, so it works. That was a relief. I don't know if I could have had the stomach to do another install, but it seems to be up and running. So after a while it thought about it, it came up with some color, it came up with some adjustments, which everything I'm going to say is fine for now. And after thinking to itself for a little bit, it fires up back into the screen where we started. So it's quite a slow test procedure. So clicking next on finish the installation gives us a few more options, and here we can set up some sound, among other things, because we can set up printers and a whole bunch of other stuff here as well. But all I'm really worried about here is just getting a sound card up and running. So as I said at the beginning of the video, we've got that Asus sound card based around the Creative Vibra C chip. And we can see here that it's gone ahead, it's recognized it, it's installed a whole bunch of Sound Blaster 16 Linux-y type things. Click next. We come into some settings for volume and such, and we've got a test button here as well. So we'll click that, see what happens. The answer was nothing. Now I figured that this card might have had its outputs and inputs in slightly different places to the order that I'm used to having them in on my other Vibra cards. So fiddled around a little bit, and we have sound, so that's cool. And that's it. So your system is installed. You can now boot into Linux. So let's do that. So there we go. So there's a whole load of diagnostic type thingies. And then in a minute we should boot into a desktop. So you had a choice of KDE or GNOME, and I chose KDE. So I think it's a bit more feature rich, but yeah, there we go. We've got a login screen. We've got a picture which goes to show how much I know about Linux. I just typed in my username to begin with, and that didn't work. But what you actually have to do is click on the icon, the little head icon, and then that just populates the username for you, and you just have to type in your password, and then off we go. So the first time I booted into the desktop, it did take quite a while. Subsequent boots were much faster, but yeah, it did take quite a while to render the screen the first time. But it got there in the end, and yeah, it's quite funky. It's all very intuitive, nothing unfamiliar, so it should be quite fun to use and easy to use. You've got like a menu in the place you'd expect it to be on the bottom left, pretty similar to Windows. So that default install gives us a variety of fun things to do. So we've got all sorts of applications on here. We've got communications stuff, we've got software development stuff, we've got multimedia stuff. And this very cool comes with a fractal generator built into it. I mean, every operating system should have a fractal generator, so it was a thrill. It reminded me of getting a free disc with the Mandelbrot set on the front of PC Format magazine in, I don't know, about 1990 or something, and just sitting there for ages watching it render. This was reasonably slow to render, but nowhere near as slow as it was on my 286 back in the day. So yeah, it's awesome. Just Linux installs are just full of fun little things like this. All sorts of things like multimedia players, MP3 players, we've got web design tools, endless amounts of fun. Even out the box, it's got all sorts of cool wallpapers. It's got a much larger selection of, I guess you call sort of more basic games, but God, it's got asteroids. Any operating system that comes with asteroids can't be half bad. So at this point, while I decide to go and play asteroids for several minutes or hours, I think I'll call it a day with this video, because it's getting long, and it's just really nice to have been able to build. It's kind of killed two birds with one stone. It's got me to build the Pentium Pro that I've always wanted, which is nice. It's turned out to be a really nice build. I've got the perfect case for it, and got a nice install of this box SUSE Linux that I've had sitting around for ages as well. So I can imagine that I'll be using this. I'll be trying to find out a bit more about some retro Linux projects that I can do. Be all sort of software stuff, but sort of using the various tools and things that you get with it. Maybe a bit of web design, maybe a bit of coding, who knows. But yeah, it's just nice to have a box like this. It will stay out in the room to be played with, and will probably feature in other projects in the future. But that's it. The Pentium Pro, the winner of the poll that I had in my last video, was built, and an added bonus, having a very cool Linux install on it as well. So that's it. I hope you've enjoyed watching it, if you've made it this far, as always, and I hope you'll join me for the next video, which will be one of the other three things that were in the poll. Haven't quite decided which one yet, but that'll probably be next week. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.